Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Nerdy Multiverse and yet another breakdown. Today we will be breaking down and giving our initial thoughts on the 5th episode of the Negan and Maggie spin-off series, The Walking Dead: Dead City. The 5th episode being titled, Stories We Tell Ourselves. This episode starts off basically where the previous one ended off as we begin in the sewers with Maggie, Ginny, Amaya, and Tommaso, after they escape the horde that trapped them in the arena in the previous one, making their way through the sewers for the majority of this episode when we are with them, as it brings a sort of gore factor to the episode, with the sewers being completely filled with the dead, as Amaya and Tommaso said they would be. But something starts to feel a bit off with Tommaso here. As Maggie needs another flashlight, Amaya is about to go through his bag and get it for her, but he doesn't let her go through his bag and grabs it himself. So what is he hiding in his bag? Well, we do find out later on in the episode. Cutting to Negan and Pearly, with Negan still being held practically as a prisoner by him even after Negan saved his life in the previous episode. Here we do see Negan holding a miniature Statue of Liberty, which reflects on his story with his father that he told Maggie in the first episode of the season. We cut between these two and the other group throughout the episode here. Again, going back to the group in the sewers, they come across a giant wall of fat, which kind of reminds me of something that you would see out of the Last of Us series with the spores. Ginny tries to make a run for it and climb out of the sewers, but Maggie stops her and tries to tell her that going after Negan is wrong, and that Ginny doesn't even know who Negan really is, or how much of a monster he is. Again, in my opinion, this is really weird behavior coming from Maggie, and I feel like the dynamic between Maggie and Negan in this franchise is always so off and on. Like, they forgive each other's actions in the season 11 finale, and then we get to at least tolerating the other's presence, but then in this series we go right back to switch it back up and Maggie hates him again while Negan is still trying to help her out. Cutting back to Negan and Pearly once again, and Perlie explains his plans to get off of the island, as their boats are likely already sunk due to the Croat and the Barazzi. He explains going for the floating docks and disconnecting them, which can take them back to the mainland, which is where Negan realizes that Perlie was originally from here and worked for the state, as did Negan as he worked as a gym teacher. A bunch of walkers show up out of nowhere and surround them, so they have to make a run for it and get to a building, where they try to get inside as more and more walkers show up and continue to surround them. And some of them seemed a bit faster than usual to me, but either way, I do hope we get to see more variant walkers soon. They make it inside of the building and through its halls before they come across a strange sort of art creation or shrine symbol of sorts hanging up, and it's made out of doll pieces, which is pretty creepy. I wonder who is hanging these up. Cutting back to Maggie's group as they make it to an open part of the sewers where things really take a turn. As Tommaso walks off, we can see him put his bag down as everybody else looks around the room, where he pops back up and shows them oxygen tanks and says that the Barazzi must have left them there for themselves, and they need these oxygen tanks so that the methane down here does not end up completely killing them, as it is filling the sewers from all of the dead bodies and the Croat's creation of energy. Amaya tries to talk about how the Croat and the Barazzi knew they were coming and suggests that maybe it was Luther who ratted them out, but obviously it was not him, as he is actually dead. So Maggie calls out Tommaso and says that it was him, and that he has had the oxygen tanks in his bag this entire time. Tommaso starts to get really defensive here, but he does end up owning up about it all. So he was a rat this entire time, saying that he did it for their people but mainly for Amaya. But she absolutely hates that idea and hates what he did. All of those people in the arena died because of him, and she storms off while crying, and Ginny follows her. With Tommaso and Maggie alone in the room now, he picks up his weapon, looks down at it, and back up at Maggie, like he's thinking about attacking her. And you can see her get ready for it, but nothing happens, luckily, and he just walks off. Cutting back to Negan and Pearly, now inside of the building, they get inside another room where they find a body of someone who took their own life, which reminds Perlie of his own brother, Joel, who he found passed away in the apartment in a previous episode. Negan notices a lone walker roaming the halls, and while Perlie and him walk through the halls of the building, he grabs a walker and throws it at Perlie and tries to get away. Coming across a boarded up doorway that reads off, "Do not open, dead out outside. A major callback to the do not open dead inside door from the very first episode of the main series. Negan can't get the boards off as the grappling hook sort of gun shoots right next to his head and the door pulls off. Perlie has already caught up to him, but he is clearly growing weaker from his injuries and having to walk around with Negan. But again, Negan proves he is not an all-around evil man and says that he cannot just leave somebody behind to die, as he helps Perlie once more, only if he agrees to just let the whole wanted situation go, as Negan was only going after those guys for what they did to his wife. Making their way through the sewers, Maggie offers up one of the oxygen tanks to Amaya as they switch off and on between people as there were only two of them, which makes me think that Tommaso planned the entire time for only him and Amaya to remain. But Amaya declines it and Maggie feels as if Amaya's planning something. Or maybe she's just extremely upset because of everything that just happened, that she may just not care what happens to her anymore. The methane is clearly getting to Maggie and cutting off her own oxygen as she grows dizzy and falls over, as she sees flashes of Herschel screaming for her, as well as flashes of the night of Glenn's death. As the group, very cluelessly by the way, takes a break in this area, which is filled with a ton of bodies. Tommaso helps Maggie back up and he starts talking about his mistakes and how the Croat promised him a place to live if he executed his plan to bring them to the arena, saying that there was a place on the mainland that the Croat promised as a home for Tommaso and his people, that has schools for kids, farms, and plenty of food to go around, and that was made completely out of bricks. This would be perfect for a family that he has planned with Amaya. But of course, this is Maggie's own settlement, which we did learn is called the Bricks in this episode. And as she hears that, you can see the worry in her face, which is a little weird because supposedly the Croat already knows about this place. So what is she so worried about? But before anything else can be said, Amaya screams from the other side of the room as walkers get a hold of her and Ginny. Tommaso and Maggie get up and try to make a run for her to help her, but Tommaso gets tripped over and held down by walkers himself. Maggie saves Ginny first as she is only a kid and then takes the walkers out that are after Amaya. But unfortunately, it is already too late, and Amaya is already dead. As Tommaso wonders if she's okay and says that what happened was his fault, we can see that he has been bitten on the neck as he then dies next. This is pretty sad to see because Amaya and Tommaso both get killed off while they are not getting along. Cutting to a building called King Francis as a modified car pulls up and crushes a walker in its path, as the Croat sits inside of this car and screams to himself in anger and gets ready to head inside of the building, covering his damaged ear before heading in, almost as if it's not tolerated here or he actually is bothered by it. As he heads inside, we see there are tons of people inside of this theater area and none of them seem to actually be a part of the Barazzi as they eye him down. He gets to one of the backstage rooms where he is met by someone who is just leaving the room that he is going to. Clear animosity here as she calls him names and purposely bumps into him to show aggression. So it seems as if there are actually a bunch of different groups a part of whatever may be going on here, and the Croat and the Barazzi are just another one of them and another small part of it. As he walks into the room, we see a lady sitting down at a mirror and we learn that she is called the Dhamma, which actually means the lady in Croatian. The Croat reports the termination of the tribespeople group to her, so he is clearly not in charge and not at the top of the chain, just as he was when he was originally with Negan and the Saviors. And speaking of Negan, the Croat informs the Dhamma that Negan is on the island, and here is where we learn that they are not looking to kill him, but recruit him and bring him in to help them out. As the Croat presents the Marshal's badge to the Dhamma, they discuss being ready to fight back against those who are trying to bring the old world and the old laws back. But they need to get Negan before they can do that, almost as if they view him as their future leader and their only hope in fighting against New Babylon and their marshals, when they all decide to venture to Manhattan. Before the Croat can leave the room, the Dhamma holds her hand out as he kisses it and gets on his knees, like he worships her. This is all very strange and I'm rather interested to see what the Dhamma's role will be like going forward. forward. It seems almost as if she may have control over all of the groups that reside on Manhattan Island. Negan and Perlie make it inside of an old school bus where Negan grabs his first aid kit, as he does know where it is because of his occupation before the apocalypse, and he patches Perlie's injuries up. They seem to have put everything behind them, at least for now, as Perlie tells Negan and us more about his backstory, family, and specifically his brother. He says that his brother had a lot of issues growing up, and Perlie often did things with him and was always by his side. As soon as Joel got a job, Perlie went with him, but it got so bad at one point that his brother got violent with his parents, which is where they stopped taking control of the situation and left it all with Perlie, which is likely why Joel's letter was only directed to Perlie and not his parents. Things took a turn, and Perlie's brother Joel did not like where he was, and that is where he ultimately was stuck when the world fell apart, in that apartment and all by himself, which is where Perlie found him long after he took his own life. Pretty sad backstory, and we can see that Perlie is still dealing with those emotions and that trauma, even if he tries to shell it most of the time. Cutting back to Maggie and Ginny as they climb over a huge pile of the dead where Maggie's leg ends up falling through and getting stuck inside of one of the bodies, as a walker's roars are heard echoing in the room. She gives Ginny her bag and tells her to get out of there, as we see one singular walker awake and crawl towards Maggie, who is still stuck, and as it crawls, we see it has multiple arms and is extremely mutated. As it rises up, we can see all of its arms and even heads falling down towards Maggie, hungry for a meal. While she struggles with the walker on her, trying to get her knife out, the walker's stomach starts to have more heads burst out of it, like the Alien movie. Trying to get at Maggie, she ends up taking the walker out by going for each of its heads, but of course, they aren't ever really gone in horror movies, so why should they be gone in the show? As she gets it off of her, one more piece of the walker pops back up, and she takes it out as well. This was so cool to see, to be honest, and I cannot wait to see more mutated walkers in the future, and I really hope that this wasn't a sort of one-time thing to see, especially knowing how quickly she was able to take it out even while stuck. Either way though, Maggie ends up getting to the exit of the sewers as she finds written in blood on the wall the word liar. Now, not only does this represent how she herself is a liar with this entire Negan and Croat situation, as we do find out that her story about the Croat taking all of their food was a complete lie, as Ginny found out herself, but this is also what the governor said right before he killed Maggie's father, Herschel. As Maggie crawls out of the sewers, the methane brings back more hallucinations and flashbacks as we see the day that Herschel was taken by the Croat. He approaches Maggie and hands her the wanted poster of Negan. So this was the plan the entire time. The Croat already knew Negan was around and wanted him on the island, and the only way to do so was take Maggie's child, Herschel, so that she could lure Negan into helping her out and use the leverage of the Croat being a former savior to help her. And that everything else that she told him was practically a lie. So basically, Negan has been a part of a secret deal this entire time. Cutting to Ginny as she makes it out of the sewers and fires off a flare gun into the city's skies, as Negan looks up from the bus and notices it, as Maggie gets out of the sewers and notices it as well, watching it light up the sky, which is where this episode ends off. Another really good episode, and I love the plot twists, the suspense, and the emotion and the reveals in this one. I did, however, feel like some parts of this episode were a bit slow, specifically the beginning of Negan and Perlie getting around the city, but it was definitely still a really good episode in my opinion. I really like seeing the new walker type, and I hope we get to see more of that sooner rather than later. I enjoyed this one a lot, and it was yet another great entry for the series, and I can't wait to see how the final episode of this first season plays out next week. But of course, I would like to hear your thoughts about this episode as well, so make sure to leave them down below. Thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed our breakdown and review on this episode, don't forget to give it a like, and with that being said, we will see you all the next time that we go through and explore the nerdy multiverse.